Welcome back to another Explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in today because we've got an absolutely incredible story to unpack. Have you ever faced a setback so massive it just felt like, like the universe was screaming at you to just give up, right? Well, today's Explainer is all about a guy who looked at the literal, total destruction of his life's work, and instead of throwing in the towel, he decided to treat it as a simple transaction, a clean slate to begin again. We're diving into the remarkable source material behind Soichiro Honda. Yep, that Honda. A man who literally built his massive success directly from the rubble of failure. Let's jump right in.
450,000 yen. Picture this, it's 1945, we're in the Japanese prefecture of Shizuoka, and Soichiro Honda, this brilliant engineer, is standing in front of what used to be his factory. And I mean, there's really not much left to look at. Nearly a decade of relentless, grueling work, a company he built from absolutely zero just to supply parts to Toyota, is literally reduced to rubble. Now, any reasonable person might survey this wreckage in a defeated, occupied, and desperately poor Japan and just retire from ambition altogether. But Honda? No way. He surveys the ruins, sells the remaining scrap to Toyota for 450,000 yen, and instantly starts plotting what he's going to build next. He literally cashed out the ashes of his dreams to fund his future.
And the sheer scale of the destruction this guy faced is just staggering. I mean, look at this. In 1944, American B-29 bombers completely obliterated his Yamashita plant. Boom, gone. Then, just a year later in 1945, the Mikawa earthquake collapses his Iwata plant. It's like the ground itself decided to finish what the war started. These were massive, catastrophic forces completely out of his control. But look at that final point on the timeline. By 1946, instead of giving up, he pivots with this unbelievable speed and founds the Honda Technical Research Institute.
Moving on to Section 1, hitting the knowledge ceiling.
So to really get inside the head of the man looking at that rubble in 1945, we kind of need to flash back briefly to the years before the war. See, Honda wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't some high society academic. He was actually the son of a blacksmith who fixed bicycles just to make ends meet. He grew up with literal grease under his fingernails. He was a tinkerer, a totally natural hands-on engineer. In 1937, he founded a company called Tokai Seiki to manufacture piston rings, and he scored the absolute dream gig, a contract supplying Toyota. But then, bam, he faces his first massive humiliation. Toyota actually rejects his piston rings because they failed quality standards. The problem was fundamental. His rings just lacked sufficient silicon. The big takeaway here is that for all of Honda's intuitive, gut-level brilliance, he simply didn't have the basic metallurgical knowledge required for the job. The self-taught engineer had officially hit the ceiling of self-teaching.
And here is where it gets really interesting. Already a business owner, already years into his professional career, Honda swallows his pride and goes back to school, part-time. He literally sat through lectures specifically to fill the exact knowledge gaps that his failed piston rings exposed. Now, there is absolutely no glamour in that, right? It's a proud craftsman admitting, totally publicly, that he just doesn't know enough. But you know what? It worked. Armed with this new, real knowledge, he fixed his manufacturing process. By the early 1940s, he was mass-producing rings that easily met Toyota's strict standards, completely saving his business. Well, saving it right up until the war and that earthquake took the whole shebang away.
This brings us to Section 2, a simple post-war idea.
So that brings us right back to the ashes. And what Honda builds out of these ruins is not just a comeback version of his old company. He looks around at a post-war Japan that is completely starved for transportation. I mean, trains are packed way beyond capacity, fuel is incredibly scarce, cars are an unthinkable luxury for most, and ordinary people are just desperate to move around, to find food, to get to work, to just try and rebuild their lives. So Honda notices this supply of small, surplus military generator engines, just leftovers from a war machine that doesn't exist anymore. And his solution is profoundly empathetic, yet so simple. He sources these surplus engines, and he literally bolts them onto bicycles. That's it. In the autumn of 1946, this became the very first product of his rather grandly named Technical Research Institute. It wasn't exactly glamorous engineering, but it was exactly what a broken country needed, at a price everyday people could actually afford.
Next up, Section 3, the perfect business partnership.
Now, having an amazing product isn't always enough to build a company, right? Honda's second act actually nearly stalled out entirely. And the crazy thing is, the reason it stalled had nothing to do with the engineering. It was simply because Honda, by his very nature, was not a businessman. Things like managing money, building sales networks, handling financing, and administration, they deeply, deeply bored him.
So in 1949, he made a brilliant move. He joined forces with Takeo Fujisawa, who was this sharp, incredibly business-minded operator. Just look at this division of labor here. It is total and it is brutally honest. Honda, the obsessive engineer, owns the machines. Fujisawa owns the business and the sales side. Neither man pretended for a second to be good at the other guy's job. And that honest dynamic, that was the exact fuel the company needed to take off.
That very same year, in 1949, the newly energized company introduced its first true designed-from-scratch motorcycle. Honda, ever the dreamer, aptly named it the Dream Type D. But here's the great irony of a company built on the rubble of two massive disasters. This brand-new flagship machine actually struggled. Early sales were heavily disappointing. The machine was plagued with mechanical issues, and competitors were fiercely crowding the market. So, once again, despite everything, Honda finds himself staring down failure. But of course, they didn't abandon the Dream Type D. Instead, Honda fell back on a behavioral loop that basically defined his entire existence. Step 1. Acknowledge failure. His first piston rings had failed, so he studied until they didn't. His first factories fell, so he built new ones. Step 2. Iterate and learn. When the Dream Type D underperformed, he didn't panic, he just iterated. And step 3. Build again. He improved the engineering, he refined the design, model after model, with this absolutely relentless drive. While Fujisawa managed the dealer networks and kept the lights on, Honda just buried himself in the workshop until the machine finally caught up to the dream in his head.
And you know what? This relentless cycle of iteration is exactly what took a super modest idea, literally bolting army generators to bicycles, and transformed it into the Honda Motor Company. They grew into one of the largest motorcycle manufacturers on Earth, and eventually one of the world's great automobile companies too. It's an outcome almost nobody would have predicted back in the 40s. Today, Honda engines run in machines on every single continent, and it is all completely traceable back to a blacksmith's son standing in front of a collapsed factory holding 450,000 yen with absolutely zero intention of stopping.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 4, Lessons from the Machinery.
So, what does this all mean for us? Why does it matter? Well, because the true lesson under the hood of every Honda engine was never really about horsepower at all. It's about the quiet, undeniable truths that we can apply to our own everyday setbacks. Let's distill this philosophy into a quick checklist of takeaways from our source material today. First off, destruction is a starting point. Even the total destruction of what you've built doesn't mean the end of your path. For Honda, it was quite literally the start of his next one. Second, admitting your knowledge gaps is a massive strength, not an admission of defeat. Those failed piston rings sent him straight back to the classroom, and the classroom made him stronger. Third, find a partner who complements your weaknesses. Teaming up with someone like Fujisawa frees you to actually be great at what you're great at. Fourth, iteration always beats early product struggles. The Dream Type D stumbled hard out of the gate, but the answer was to keep improving it, not to surrender. And finally, starting from a hopeless, war-torn, totally resource-scarce situation is still starting, and starting is enough. None of Honda's legendary success happens if he just looked at his flattened factory and decided the universe had made its point.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative question based on today's source text. What is your first shaky step? Honda's incredible story proves that the absolute biggest leaps almost always start with the smallest, shakiest step long before the world ever gives you permission to take it. What happens when you refuse to accept that destroyed means finished and you just start building again with whatever the world has left you? Honestly, think about that for your own life. If this explainer sparked your curiosity today and you love learning about how structured visual knowledge can break down these complex, inspiring stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. We exist to bring you more fascinating material just like this. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next explainer.